My brother's fiancée slapped me across the face, right in front of 200 guests, the priest and the man I once called my best friend, my brother, all because I didn't give them My name is Madison, and yesterday was supposed to be the happiest day of my brother Ethan's life. It turned into the most humiliating moment of mine. I stood there, cheek burning, mascara ruined, while silence swallowed the wedding hall. No one said a word, not even Ethan. Vanessa, his beautiful, perfect bride-to-be, looked down on me like I was the dirt on her designer heels. And I just walked away. No screams, no explanations, no tears. You're probably wondering what I didn't give them that could have possibly justified a public assault. A toast? A blessing? A check? No. It was something far more valuable, and by the time you finish this story, you'll understand why not giving it to them was the best decision I've ever made. And the day I was slapped became the day I finally woke up. Growing up, I was the little sister who tagged along everywhere my big brother went. Ethan wasn't just my brother, he was my safe place, my protector. The only family I had after our parents died in a tragic car accident when I was 16. He was 21 at the time, freshly out of college, suddenly forced into a parental role he never asked for. But he never complained. Instead, he held my hand through every panic attack, every report card, every lonely night when I cried myself to sleep, missing Mom. We had this unspoken pact. It was us against the world. I remember him standing in the kitchen one night, poring over unpaid bills and student loan forms, telling me, "No matter what happens, Mads, I've got you. We don't let anyone mess with us, ever." When I got a scholarship offer to a university out of state, he was the first to celebrate. But when I saw the state of our finances, the long hours Ethan was pulling to keep the house and both of us afloat, I made a quiet decision. I declined the offer. Instead, I enrolled in a local community college and started working part-time at a diner. I told Ethan it was because I wanted to stay close. He never knew the truth. That I did it for him. We built a rhythm. I took over grocery runs and late-night ramen dinners. He handled car repairs and movie nights. Our little home, though modest, was full of warmth. We celebrated birthdays with homemade cakes and Christmases with hand-drawn cards. And on the anniversary of our parents' deaths, we always lit 2 candles and sat in silence, honoring them in our own way. One time, I was down with the flu during finals week, and Ethan stayed up 3 nights straight to take care of me. He made me soup, cleaned up my mess, and even read my psychology textbook aloud so I wouldn't fall behind. That's the kind of brother he was. That's the kind of love we had. People used to call us weirdly close. Maybe we were, but I didn't care. Ethan was all I had, and I would have given anything to see him happy. I even stayed up late helping him craft dating profiles when he finally felt ready to move on and find love. I screened every girl with the silent scrutiny of a protective sister. Until Vanessa. She was different. Glamorous, confident, the kind of woman who turned heads when she walked into a room. Ethan was smitten from the start, and for the first time, I saw a distance creep into our bond. I told myself it was normal. Life moves on and people change. But deep down, I missed the way things used to be. The inside jokes, the 2 a.m. talks. The feeling that I was still his priority. Still, I tried to be supportive. I smiled through dinners where I felt invisible, laughed at jokes that weren't funny, and even helped plan their engagement party. I bought a dress I couldn't afford, toasted their future with a fake smile, and reminded myself over and over, this is what sisters do. This is love. One of my favorite memories was when we built a treehouse in the backyard the summer I turned 10. Ethan spent every weekend sawing wood, hammering nails, and letting me decorate it with glow-in-the-dark stars. We called it the Sky Cabin. It became our secret hideaway, a place where we'd read comic books, tell ghost stories, and pretend the rest of the world didn't exist. Even as teenagers, we'd sneak up there with hot cocoa and blankets just to talk under the stars. He used to say, "As long as we've got each other, we'll be okay." That phrase stuck with me through every hardship. Through high school breakups, job rejections, moments I felt invisible, Ethan's voice was always the anchor pulling me back to shore. So when he met Vanessa and started canceling our movie nights, missing our anniversary candle ritual, brushing off inside jokes with a distracted smile, I didn't just miss my brother, I missed home. I missed the feeling of being wanted. But I held on, because families are supposed to evolve, right? I told myself that love meant making space, that if I gave enough, waited long enough, I'd still matter. I didn't know I was slowly writing myself out of his story. The first sign was subtle. Ethan forgot our Friday movie night for the first time in years. He texted me an hour after it was supposed to start. Sorry, V wanted to try this new sushi place. Rain check? I stared at the screen longer than I should have, trying to ignore the sting in my chest. One missed night wasn't the end of the world. People get busy. But it kept happening. Phone calls went unanswered. Inside jokes fell flat. Our shared routines slowly dissolved into occasional catch-ups, always scheduled around Vanessa's availability. When I brought it up, Ethan smiled awkwardly and said, "Come on, Mads. Don't be dramatic. I'm just trying to build something here." Vanessa, to her credit, was always sweet in front of him. She'd compliment my outfits, ask polite questions, even bring me lattes from that overpriced cafe I once mentioned liking. But the moment Ethan left the room, the mask would drop, her eyes would narrow just slightly, her voice would tighten. "I hope you're not expecting to live in that house forever," she once whispered, smiling as she handed me a cup. "It's not really ideal for a couple, don't you think?" I laughed it off at the time, but her jabs became more frequent. Backhanded compliments, subtle digs, strategic silences at family dinners. I started noticing how Ethan's opinions shifted, how suddenly I was always too sensitive, or taking things the wrong way. Once, at a family brunch, Vanessa mentioned hosting Thanksgiving at their new apartment. I had been planning it for weeks, and even started prepping the menu. Ethan looked surprised, but didn't say anything. I waited for him to acknowledge it, to back me up. He didn't. "You didn't tell her?" Vanessa asked innocently, looping her arm around his. "We figured it's time for some new traditions, right, babe?" That was the day I realized I was being phased out. I tried talking to Ethan about it, really tried. I brought up the dinners, the comments, and the way I felt like a third wheel in my own family. He listened, but his eyes didn't hold the same empathy they once did. "Vanessa's just trying to fit in," he said. "You're being a little harsh. She actually worries you don't like her." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. What was I supposed to say? That the woman he loved saw me as a threat? That I felt like an intruder in the home I'd helped him keep afloat? Soon, decisions about family matters were made without me. I found out about Ethan's promotion through a Facebook post. Their engagement announcement came via group text. When I asked why he hadn't told me sooner, he replied, "I thought Vanessa did." She hadn't. Of course she hadn't. What hurt most wasn't her manipulation. It was how easily Ethan let go of our bond. The brother who once promised we'd always face the world together was now letting someone else redraw the lines of what family meant. And every day, those lines moved further and further away from me. I remember one afternoon vividly. I had baked Ethan's favorite, chocolate chip banana bread, and dropped by his apartment unannounced like I used to. Vanessa opened the door, her smile tight. "Oh," she said, glancing at the pan in my hands. "That's sweet. Ethan's actually napping. He's been really exhausted lately." Her tone made it clear she didn't want me there. Still, I offered her the bread and said I'd wait. She sighed, stepped aside, and led me into the living room, where I sat alone for nearly an hour. I never saw Ethan. When I left, the bread was still untouched on the counter. Another time, she accidentally left me out of a group chat planning Ethan's surprise birthday dinner. I found out the night before through one of our cousins. When I showed up, Vanessa acted surprised. "Oh my God, I thought I added you," she gasped, feigning guilt so poorly it felt insulting. What stung more was how Ethan brushed it off. "It's just a party," he said. "Stop making everything about you." But I wasn't. I was just trying to stay visible. Then came the subtle suggestions. Vanessa hinting that maybe it was time I found my own space, that I seemed restless living in the house alone. It was the same house Ethan and I grew up in, the one I maintained after our parents died, while Ethan went off to college. She framed it as concern, but the message was clear. I didn't belong. It became exhausting, trying to prove my worth in a family I had helped build. I began to dread gatherings, conversations, even phone calls. My home no longer felt like mine. My brother no longer felt like my brother. And the worst part? I kept pretending everything was fine. I kept showing up, smiling, playing the role of the supportive sister, while inside, I was slowly breaking. Because losing someone you love isn't always sudden. Sometimes, it's 1,000 tiny goodbyes you're too afraid to say out loud. It happened 3 weeks before the wedding. Vanessa had invited both sides of the family over for a pre-wedding brunch. A unity gathering, she called it, meant to foster connection and love. I arrived with a bottle of wine and low expectations. The living room was decked out in cream linens and gold-trimmed candles. Vanessa had even hired a private chef. She stood at the center like a queen hosting court, dazzling in a white silk jumpsuit. Ethan, as always, hovered nearby, looking proud and slightly overwhelmed. I tried to smile, to fit in. I mingled, nodded, and laughed at the appropriate volume, until Vanessa tapped her champagne glass and asked for everyone's attention. "There's one more thing," she said sweetly. "One more piece of this puzzle to make our future perfect." She turned to me with a rehearsed tenderness. "Mads, we were thinking, it would mean the world to start our married life in the house you're living in. It's where Ethan grew up, where so many memories were made. It's just special." My heart dropped. She kept going. "Of course we'd renovate, maybe even expand it for future kids, and we'd want you to feel welcome any time, but as our wedding gift, would you consider giving it to us?" Silence. It took a second for me to process what she was asking. The house. The one our parents left to Ethan and me. The one I had maintained for years, paid taxes on, repaired leaks in, and painted walls for. The house where I celebrated my high school graduation alone, after Mom and Dad died. What? I managed. Ethan stepped forward. "It's not like we're kicking you out," he said quickly. "We'd give you time to move. And obviously, help with the process." I looked at him, stunned. "You're serious?" "It just makes sense," he said, avoiding my gaze. "You're single, you don't need that much space, and Vanessa's right, it's symbolic, a way to show you support us." I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Vanessa placed a manicured hand on my arm. It would really mean a lot, a gesture of love, of family unity. I pulled my arm back. "That house is half mine," I said, voice trembling. "Mom and Dad left it to both of us." Ethan's jaw tightened. "So you're going to be petty about a house? Seriously?" "Petty?" I whispered. "It's just a house, Mads," he said, louder now. "You're my sister. Sacrificing a little isn't the end of the world." Everyone stared. Someone cleared their throat. I could feel my cheeks burning. "You want me to give up my home as a gift?" I said. "To prove I love you?" Vanessa sighed. "We didn't mean to upset you." But she had, and Ethan didn't stop her. I walked out that day with my dignity barely intact. No one followed me. No one checked in. Later that night, Ethan sent a short text. "Think about it. Don't be selfish." That was the moment something inside me snapped. Not because of the house, but because the one person who was supposed to protect me had decided I was expendable. And deep down, I knew. He'd already made his choice. I just hadn't wanted to see it. I spent that night staring at the ceiling, phone in hand, reading Ethan's message over and over. "Don't be selfish." I typed a dozen responses, deleted them all. The next morning, I tried calling him. Straight to voicemail. I emailed a copy of the will. Our parents had left the house, jointly, to both of us. No response. I drove to his apartment. Vanessa answered the door. "He's not here," she said flatly, even though I could hear the low hum of his voice inside. "Please," I said, my voice cracking. "I just want to talk." She leaned against the frame. "You had your chance yesterday. Ethan's exhausted. He doesn't need the extra stress." I stood there for a full minute, until the door shut in my face. After that, things moved quickly. A week later, I received a letter from a lawyer, someone Vanessa's father knew, suggesting a voluntary property transfer for family consolidation purposes. It sounded like corporate jargon, but the message was clear. Sign over your share. Be quiet. Be good. I brought the letter to a legal aid office. The woman who read it frowned, then asked, "You're not seriously considering this, are you?" I shook my head, tears threatening to spill. "It's not about the house," I said. "It's about my brother." She nodded slowly. "Then keep the house, because that's the only thing they can't rewrite." That week was a blur. I stopped eating. I couldn't sleep. Every corner of the house echoed with memories. Of birthdays, of homework at the kitchen table, of Ethan and me dancing barefoot in the living room when we got the news he got into his dream college. It had always been our place. Now, it felt like a battlefield. Relatives began calling. Some urged me to reconsider. "It's just brick and wood, honey." Others were more blunt. "Don't ruin his wedding over pride." Only Aunt Claire, our mom's sister, called and said, "Don't you dare give in. Your mother would never forgive him for this." I wanted to believe that, but I also felt like the villain in everyone's eyes. The final blow came at a family dinner the following weekend. Vanessa stood up with a glass of wine and announced that Ethan and she were moving forward with their dream home. She thanked everyone for their support and understanding, glancing at me for the briefest moment with a smile so tight it could cut glass. Ethan never looked in my direction. I left before dessert. That night, I packed a duffel bag, locked the house, and drove to a cheap motel off the highway. I stared at the faded wallpaper and wondered how I had ended up there. Displaced, forgotten, discarded by the only person I had left. All for a woman who wore silk jumpsuits and smiled like a knife. And yet, despite everything, some foolish part of me still hoped Ethan would come after me. He didn't. The motel room lasted 3 nights, then my savings ran dry. I packed up what little I had, a duffel bag of clothes, my worn-out laptop, a framed photo of me and Ethan as kids, and the silver necklace Mom gave me on my 13th birthday. Everything else, I left behind. For the next 2 weeks I lived in my car. It was summer, but the nights were still cruel. I curled up in the back seat with a blanket from the trunk and parked in the lot behind the diner where I worked double shifts just to stay afloat. I showered in the employee bathroom, kept dry shampoo and wipes in my glove box, and pretended I wasn't unraveling. No one knew, not even my manager. I smiled through every table I served, forced cheerful banter with customers, and memorized their orders like nothing had changed. But everything had. At night, I'd scroll through social media under dim streetlights, seeing photos of Ethan and Vanessa beaming at wedding cake tastings, engagement photo shoots, even a bridal shower I hadn't been invited to. Cousins commented with heart emojis. Aunt Grace wrote, "Can't wait to see you two in the old house, such a sweet start." My stomach twisted. They all knew. They all approved. I tried calling Ethan once more, straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. One night, after a 12-hour shift and a rainstorm that leaked through the car's roof lining, I broke. I sat in the front seat, soaked and shaking, holding that silver necklace in my fist like it could anchor me to something real. I sobbed so hard I couldn't breathe, screamed into the silence, hit the steering wheel until my knuckles ached. That was the closest I came to giving up. But something stopped me. Maybe it was Mom's necklace. Maybe it was the sound of a song on the radio that we used to sing in the kitchen. Maybe it was the simple refusal to let Vanessa win. I didn't know, but I made a promise to myself that night. I would not disappear. The next morning, I went to work early. I asked for extra hours. I started applying for studio apartments, even the tiniest ones. Most were out of budget. But one landlord agreed to meet me after I told him my situation. He looked at me, pale, tired, desperate, and said, "Let's figure something out." That was the first crack of light. I moved in 3 days later. It wasn't much, just one room, a mattress on the floor, and a view of a brick wall, but it was mine. No Vanessa, no judgment, no ghost of betrayal hanging in the hallway. I hung the photo of me and Ethan by the bed, not out of sentiment, but as a reminder. I was alone now, and somehow I had to learn to live with that. Even at the diner, things started to crack. I dropped plates, forgot orders, and zoned out mid-conversation with customers. My coworkers began to whisper. One afternoon, my manager pulled me aside and asked if I needed a few days off. I shook my head, forced a smile, and said I was fine. But I wasn't. Every time I heard the bell above the front door chime, my heart clenched, half hoping Ethan would walk in and say it was all a mistake, that he missed me, that he remembered. He never did. Instead, I overheard 2 women at table 7 gossiping about me. One of them was my second cousin's friend. "She's staying in her car," I heard. "Must have done something bad for Ethan to cut her off like that." They clucked their tongues like I was some dirty little secret. Shame burned hotter than any heartbreak. I started taking breaks in the alley behind the kitchen, sitting on crates with my head between my knees, trying not to cry. Sometimes I would look at the necklace and imagine Mom sitting beside me, brushing my hair back and whispering, "You're stronger than this." I wasn't sure I believed it, but I clung to the thought like a life raft. When my first paycheck came in after moving into the apartment, I didn't buy groceries or new shoes. I bought a second-hand lamp and a mini fridge. Then I wrote in my journal for the first time in months, "Still standing, still mine." It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. I still woke up with a hole in my chest, still scanned every message notification like it might be from Ethan. But, day by day, the silence became more bearable, the ache dulled, the anger cooled into something harder, quieter, resolve. No one was going to save me. Not my brother. Not the family who chose silence. Not even the memory of who we used to be. Just as I had saved myself. It started with a voice behind me at the grocery store. "I haven't seen you in ages." I turned around and saw Liam. Liam Parker, Ethan's best friend since grade school, the boy who used to braid my hair while we watched Disney movies, who once punched a guy in high school for making fun of my braces. We hadn't spoken in over a year, not since Ethan and Vanessa got serious, and our circle quietly fractured. He looked the same, maybe a little taller, more filled out, his scruff a little more defined, but his eyes were still kind. "Liam," I said, stunned. "Wow. You okay?" he asked immediately, like he could see the truth behind my fake smile and tired eyes. We ended up talking for an hour in the parking lot. I told him everything, well, most of it. The house, the wedding, the fallout. I didn't cry, but my voice cracked more than once. He didn't interrupt, just listened. At the end, he said, "You didn't deserve any of that. You know that, right?" I shrugged. "Doesn't change the fact that I lost everything." "No," he said gently, "you still have you, and that's not nothing." We started meeting for coffee after that. Once a week turned into twice, then dinners, then long walks around the lake, where we talked about everything from childhood cartoons to career regrets. Liam had left his job in finance to pursue graphic design. He was freelancing now, happier than ever. "I thought about you a lot," he admitted one night, "wondered where you went." I looked away. I didn't go anywhere, just disappeared for a while. He didn't push, just reached for my hand and held it for a moment longer than necessary. It was Liam who encouraged me to sign up for a digital marketing course. "You've got the brain for it. And the heart. That's rare." At first, I was terrified. I hadn't studied anything in years. But slowly, with Liam's help, I built a schedule. I watched lectures at night, practiced designs during my breaks, and built a portfolio from scratch. I started applying for internships, sending cold emails, and updating my resume. I even designed a mock website for the diner and showed it to my manager, who was so impressed she let me build them a new site on the spot. For the first time in months, I felt capable. I decorated my little apartment with thrift store art and fairy lights. I stopped checking Ethan's social media. I stopped flinching at Vanessa's name. I wore makeup again. I laughed without guilt. I looked in the mirror and saw someone who wasn't broken, just rebuilding. One evening, Liam and I sat on my fire escape watching the city lights blink on. He handed me a small envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "Open it." Inside was a ticket to a creative tech conference in Chicago. "I can't afford this," I said. "It's covered," he said. "Call it a scholarship. Or a bet. I'm betting on you." I stared at him, overwhelmed. "Why?" I whispered. "Because you forgot," he said. "But I remember. You're not just Ethan's sister, you're Madison, and you're more than enough." That night I didn't sleep. I lay in bed thinking about every time I'd been told I was too much, not enough, too emotional, too stubborn. And I realized something. They were wrong. I wasn't too much. They were simply too small to hold all of me. And I was finally ready to take up space again. Weeks passed, and little by little things began to shift. I started waking up before my alarm, not from anxiety, but from anticipation. I was building something, again. Not just a career or a resume, but a version of myself I actually liked. I volunteered to run social media for a local shelter. I created a campaign that helped raise more donations in 1 month than they had in the past year. The director hugged me with tears in her eyes. "You have no idea what you've done," she said. But I did, because it wasn't just about them. It was about me, proving I still mattered. Liam was there through it all. He never tried to rescue me, never spoke over my pain. He simply stood beside me as I climbed, offering a steady hand when I faltered. One afternoon, he helped me set up a makeshift desk by the window. "You need a workspace," he said. "Somewhere your ideas can breathe." I found myself looking forward to mornings, sipping cheap coffee from a chipped mug, sketching out ad copy and campaign ideas, with music playing softly in the background. I wasn't rich. I wasn't even stable yet, but I was alive, awake. Sometimes I'd still think of Ethan, wonder if he ever missed me. But the ache wasn't sharp anymore. It was distant, muted, like a story I'd outgrown. And that, more than anything, told me I was healing. The day I got my first paid freelance gig, Liam showed up with a cupcake and a tiny plastic trophy that said, "Most badass comeback." I laughed so hard I cried. I wasn't fixed, but I was no longer broken. This was becoming. I wasn't going to attend the wedding. For weeks I debated deleting the invitation, but something inside me refused to vanish quietly. I didn't want revenge. I wanted clarity, closure, And maybe, deep down, I wanted Ethan to look me in the eye one last time and realize what he'd done. So I put on a navy dress, pinned up my hair, and walked into that gleaming art gallery venue like I belonged there. The room buzzed with candlelight and catered elegance. Rows of chairs faced a floral arch. Vanessa glowed in white lace, all smiles and sparkle. Ethan looked handsome, if a bit too pale. The air was thick with curated joy. I kept my distance during the ceremony, watched from the edge as they exchanged vows and rings. When the officiant said, "If anyone has a reason this couple should not be joined," I felt my breath hitch, but said nothing. It was at the reception where everything changed. The MC took the mic between cake and first dance. "Now, we'd like to invite the groom's sister Madison to say a few words and present her special gift to the happy couple." All eyes turned to me. I hadn't planned to speak, but something about the way Vanessa's smile faltered at my name made me stand. I walked slowly to the stage, took the mic, cleared my throat. "Hi," I began, voice steady. "Most of you know me as Ethan's sister, and until recently, I was proud of that title." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "I didn't bring a gift today, not the house they asked for, not money, not heirlooms. What I'm giving you is the truth." Gasps. Vanessa stiffened. Ethan looked frozen. I continued. "The truth is, I was asked, pressured, to give up the house our parents left us. A house I cared for, paid for, and lived in for years. I was told that giving it away would prove my love." I paused. But real love doesn't demand sacrifice as proof. Real love protects, respects, includes. I turned to Vanessa. "You pretended to be kind while slowly erasing me. You manipulated my brother, our family, and tried to turn my home into a trophy." Whispers grew louder, phones started recording. "You told relatives I was unstable, that I didn't support the wedding, that I didn't belong." Vanessa stepped forward. "That's enough." But I didn't stop, and when I said no to being erased, you painted me as selfish. But I'm not selfish. I'm surviving. Her hand moved faster than I expected. The slap echoed across the room. Gasps, a scream, glass clinking as someone dropped a drink. I stood still, cheek stinging, heart pounding. A dozen phones captured the moment. And then I said into the mic, clear as day, "Thank you for confirming everything I just said." Security stepped in, the MC stuttered. Vanessa was escorted off the stage in a swirl of gasps and murmurs. Ethan didn't move, he just stared at me, jaw slack. As I stepped off the stage, people started whispering in corners, some with hands over their mouths in disbelief. A few came up to me, distant relatives, old neighbors, quietly offering nods, squeezed hands, even, "I had no idea," murmurs. One older woman, Vanessa's great-aunt maybe, leaned in and said, "Took guts, honey, good for you." I didn't stay long, I didn't need to. By the time I got home, the clip had already gone viral. Comments poured in. "Who slapped someone at their own wedding? That sister is a queen, protect Madison at all costs." For once I didn't cry. He smiled. The aftermath was instant. By the next morning, the video had hit 3 major wedding drama pages. Headlines like "Bride slaps groom's sister on stage" and "Truth bomb at a wedding reception" circulated rapidly. I turned off my phone for most of the day, but Liam called. "You just broke the internet," he said, trying not to laugh. I laughed too. It felt good, like breathing after holding your breath for far too long. But the part that stuck with me most wasn't the slap. It was the silence before it. That moment when I stood there and didn't flinch. That moment when I told my story, not to destroy, but to reclaim. Because for too long, I had let other people narrate my worth. And now, I had taken it back. I received an email from Ethan a few days later. No subject line, just a single sentence. "I didn't know." I stared at the screen for a long time, then typed, "You didn't want to," and hit send. I wasn't bitter. I didn't want an apology or a reunion. I just wanted him to sit with it, to know that, even if it was too late to fix, I had found a voice louder than silence. And had found myself. And I was never handing her over again. That night I lit a candle in my tiny apartment. No fanfare, no crowd. Just me and the quiet hum of a city that finally felt like mine. I sat on the floor, wrapped in a blanket, watching the flame flicker, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about what I'd lost. I was thinking about what I'd reclaimed. My story, my strength, my name. Madison. But of course, truth has a funny way of echoing louder than any curated lie. And what happened next? Well, that was only the beginning of their reckoning. It didn't take long for the internet to turn. Within 24 hours, the video of Vanessa slapping me had been reshared thousands of times. TikTok reenacted the moment with dramatic music, and Reddit threads dissected every word of my speech. Hashtags like slap wedding and sister saves herself began trending. Public sentiment was swift and brutal. Vanessa was slammed for her behavior. Influencers who had once collaborated with her quickly distanced themselves. Her beauty brand sponsorships pulled out within days. Even her wedding planner posted a not-so-subtle Instagram story that read, "No amount of florals can fix a rotten attitude." But it wasn't just Vanessa who faced consequences. Ethan, too, became a target. Screenshots of his leaked email, "I didn't know," went viral. People flooded his old photos with comments like, "Your sister deserved better," "Shame on you," and "enabler." The man who had once been praised as a loyal brother was now seen as complicit in my erasure. News of the wedding collapse spread across gossip blogs. Apparently, Vanessa moved out the day after the reception. The lavish honeymoon was canceled. So was the gift registry, the housewarming, and, eventually, the marriage license itself. From what I heard through a cousin, Ethan was devastated, not just by the fallout, but by the realization that he had been wrong. He tried calling, texting, he even emailed me again, a long-winded apology detailing how he had been blind, manipulated, and cowardly. He said he never meant to hurt me, that he missed me, that he still thought about our old movie nights and treehouse summers. I never responded. Instead, I sent him a card. On the front, a watercolor of two sparrows flying in opposite directions. Inside, I wrote, "I forgive you, but I'm not coming back." No anger, no accusations, just the truth. Vanessa, meanwhile, became something of a digital pariah. Her accounts went dark. Someone spotted her working at a boutique in another state. Rumors said she was starting over. Others claimed she was still bitter, blaming everyone but herself. But none of it mattered to me anymore. What mattered was this. I was no longer the girl who begged to be seen. I didn't crave their validation. I didn't need Ethan's protection, or Vanessa's approval, or the family's acceptance. I had my own voice now, my own life. And I was finally free. Some nights, I'd catch myself staring at the card I sent him. 5 simple words that carried a lifetime of weight. "I forgive you, but I'm not coming back." Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean pretending none of it happened. It meant releasing the bitterness that had once choked me. It meant choosing peace over punishment. But walking away, that was survival. Ethan didn't write again after the card. Aunt Grace told me he read it in silence, then folded it neatly and tucked it into a drawer. She said he'd been going to therapy, that he'd started journaling, volunteering. Maybe he was trying to become someone worth knowing again. I wished him well, truly, but from afar. Vanessa faded into gossip. Her name, once a brand, is now a cautionary tale whispered among influencers and stylists. "Don't pull a Vanessa," they'd say. I once stumbled across a podcast episode discussing the incident. They played my speech, broke down the dynamics of sibling loyalty and family guilt. One host said, "That moment wasn't about vengeance. It was about reclaiming space." I smiled at that, because that was exactly what it had been. I never wanted to destroy anyone. I just wanted to stop disappearing. Now, I was no longer a footnote in someone else's fairy tale. I was writing my own chapters. Louder, bolder, mine. They had lost their power the moment I stopped needing their apology to heal. And that was the real victory. Because in the end, this wasn't just about a ruined wedding or a broken promise. It was about the kind of woman I chose to become after the storm. Months passed. I didn't just survive. I flourished. I moved into a cozy apartment with sun-drenched windows and a balcony garden. I finished my degree. I learned to cook something besides instant noodles. I danced. In the living room to old 2000s pop. I smiled at strangers. I slept without nightmares. There was no grand reuniting moment, no dramatic twist, just peace. And peace, I realized, was the most revolutionary ending of all. I no longer measured my worth through my family's approval or Vanessa's disdain. I didn't wonder if Ethan regretted things. I didn't scroll through wedding posts, comparing timelines. I lived. I started journaling again, painting. I even submitted an article to a women's magazine and was shocked when they published it. "Boundaries are not betrayal. Why walking away saved my life." and with each new day, I felt more like myself. People often ask what I learned through it all: the betrayal, the slap, the internet frenzy. Here's what I tell them. Love, real love, never demands the erasure of your identity. Family doesn't mean unlimited access to your soul. And just because someone shares your blood doesn't mean they're entitled to your silence. Being a sister, a daughter, a niece, those are roles. But being Madison? That's right. And no one gets to take that from me. I also learned that forgiveness isn't always for the other person. Sometimes it's the key that unlocks your own freedom. I didn't forgive Ethan so he could sleep better at night. I forgave him so I could finally dream in peace. Most of all, I learned that self-respect isn't a luxury. It's oxygen. You don't sacrifice it for anyone. Not for a brother, not for a bride, not for the illusion of love. And if anyone ever asks you to prove your loyalty by diminishing your worth, walk away. Run if you have to. Because the people who truly love you would never make you choose between them and yourself. The people who matter will never ask you to disappear to make them shine. As for me, one Thursday evening, months after the wedding that never was, I arrived late to my graduation ceremony. The auditorium was already buzzing. I slipped in through the side door, cap in hand. Just as I stepped into the light of the stage, scanning for my seat, I saw him. A figure in the front row. Waiting. He smiled. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like the future had arrived. I looked around and saw rows of faces. Young, old, proud, tired, all carrying their own stories, their own victories. For a moment I was overwhelmed by the quiet roar of possibility. I took my seat, placed my hand over my heart and whispered, "You made it." Not because I'd earned a diploma, but because I'd learned how to protect my boundaries, how to stay soft without being stepped on, how to rise without asking permission. Later that night, as graduates tossed their caps into the sky, Liam handed me a small envelope. Inside was a note in his familiar handwriting. "The world tried to dim you. You lit up anyway." I folded it and placed beside my mother's locket, the two reminders I now carried close. Some days were still hard. Healing isn't a straight line, but each step forward, no matter how shaky, reminded me that I was no longer walking in someone else's shadow. I was building my own light. And as I stepped outside that auditorium, into the crisp evening air, I knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning.